It's a real pleasure and honor to be here at the National Academy of Sciences and to be in this auditorium. Can everyone hear me okay? I want to make sure that I'm speaking to the mic loudly enough. So good evening. As JD mentioned, I'm trained as a biochemist. And as a scientist, we use science as a way to understand the world around us through experimentation and building theories. But I'm now working alongside designers at Stanford at the Center for Design Research. And designers use design as a way to understand the world through human-centeredness, having empathy for users, having empathy for team members, and having empathy for oneself, being reflective of their own design practices and choices. And so I've come to learn from these designers that empathy is a really important part of solving complex problems. So as someone who works in both spaces, I can definitely see how these worldviews, these priorities are quite different. But at the same time, I do have an appreciation for both perspectives. So as a scientist, we create knowledge through questions that we ourselves are curious about. And designers create knowledge by putting human needs first. And today I'll be talking about where these two ideas collide to drive new outcomes in science. So let's talk about scientific discovery. The way that we create knowledge in science is that we rely on conceptual collisions, bringing ideas together in new ways. And we have evidence that the most impactful scientific discoveries come from a certain type of conceptual collisions. It's when we combine conventional knowledge together with a small bit of novelty. So what that means is that when we're working in our specific field, the most impactful science is when the new knowledge is created within a foundation that we're very familiar with. So that's the key of combining a little bit of novelty together with conventionality. So in science, this is what a paradigm shift looks like, and this is one of the ways that we create new knowledge. So if we start at the bottom, which is a foundation of knowledge, we build new knowledge over time through evidence and designing experiments. A paradigm shift occurs when the accumulation of evidence no longer fits our theories, and so we have to reject those theories and come up with new theories to understand the world around us. So this knowledge is continuously being updated. So one of the ways that this gets manifested, of course, is in technology that I think a lot of us here would relate to. So here's an example that impacts us all. So on the left, you see your grandfather clock, which is based on the classical Newtonian physics, where force describes movement and causes the pendulum to have momentum. And over time, physicists found evidence that no longer conformed to Newtonian physics, so a whole new field of quantum mechanics had to be developed. So now you have digital clocks. Everyone has one of them in their pocket right now on their mobile phone, which gets synchronized to the atomic clock, which is based on principles of quantum mechanics. So if knowledge can be continually updated, the question I ask myself is, if our research problems are continually becoming more complex, should we also be updating the way that we approach scientific research itself, the way that we discover new knowledge in science? All right, so the traditional approach to creating new ideas in science is through a very rational approach. So as scientists, we take the knowledge that's been generated before us, we review what's known, and we are very interested in what's unknown. And so we propose ideas that discover things just beyond the edge of what we know today. So this is how most science works. It's very rational, and it works most of the time. But what about the scientific challenges that are really hard to solve because the answers are really complicated, or we actually don't know or have enough foundational knowledge? So as a biochemist, this is the way that we create new knowledge. This is the lab that I worked in, and the way that we come up with new ideas is that we look at to see what others in our field have done. So we speak to our colleagues, we look up manuals and reference materials, we look at journals to see what other people have published in our field. But what if we were to look at other fields as a source for conceptual collisions? So here is an example of an important and complicated biochemistry problem. So the question is, how do you predict how a protein folds into a three-dimensional structure? So a protein starts off as an unfolded protein. It looks like a strand of spaghetti, and it needs to fold into a very specific three-dimensional structure here on the right. And that final structure is really important. So if it's folded correctly, it can then go off and do its function, which is what you want it to do. If it's folded incorrectly, it causes a lot of problems, and it's a source for many human diseases. Okay, so for over 40 years, we've been investigating this particular question. And we still don't have an answer for most proteins. So this includes examining the problem from multiple different scientific perspectives: physics, chemistry, molecular, biochemistry. So whether or not you're looking through at any of those disciplinary angles, it's still a scientific perspective. Okay, so here is what a conceptual collision looks like. This is the protein folding problem, but looked at from a video game perspective. So this is called Foldit. It's an online game that was created by scientists, which uses scientific rules on how proteins fold. So this game is actually open to the public. Anyone can play it. You don't have to be a scientist. And it offers you the chance to solve these protein folding problems by giving you puzzles. So to do this, the scientists had to engage the users in a way that lets the users solve the problem from their own perspective while still being scientifically accurate. And that's really key. And so the thing that's most fascinating to me from a biochemistry standpoint is all these design aspects that they use to develop this approach that I see designers using all the time. So one, reframing the problem from a scientific problem to a video game. Second, increasing or expanding the scope of the problem. This is really counterintuitive. You would think that by bringing in non-scientists, you're actually making the problem harder to solve. Number three, engaging users in a form of problem solving. So looking at the different ways that people would want to be engaged in some sort of scientific problem. And four, using visual thinking. Okay, so the results from Foldit were quite outstanding and was a really novel discovery and advanced the field of science. So the proof of concept that the video game Foldit could work was published in Nature. And then they did a follow-up example where they took a protein that could not be solved scientifically, gave it to the folded community, and they were able to solve it. And that's an example of an HIV protease that they're able to solve. So one of the interesting aspects about this is when you look at the people who excelled at Foldit, it wasn't the people who were professional biochemists. In fact, the best, the players that scored the highest in Foldit actually were non-scientists. So you can see that the Foldit contribution was not traditional, but it was also not accidental either. It was designed to contribute, it was designed for people to contribute in a way that was scientifically meaningful. And to me, this is a really good example of a conceptual collision where good scientific thinking meets good design thinking. Okay, so in Foldit, we have a scientific problem that brought in non-scientists to co-create and make a new discovery together. And as you can see, the Foldit players are named as co-authors on these Nature papers. And so as scientists, how might we create other conceptual collisions purposefully? So this was one of our aims at a recent workshop that we did at Stanford, where we brought scientific and design researchers together. Our goal was to create a framework for research collaboration, and we started by prototyping conversation between scientists and designers to see how we can constructively create these conceptual collisions. So some friends of the National Academy of Sciences may recognize the gentleman in the upper left. That's Dr. Bruce Alberts. He's there prototyping his ideas. And this week, Dr. Bruce Alberts won the Lasker Award, which is one of the highest honors in science. And I was like, yeah, we got Dr. Bruce Alberts to prototype. I think we can get any scientist to prototype. Okay, so we use this baseball metaphor to illustrate how to build capacity for scientists and designers to collaborate. So getting to first base requires awareness. For the scientists, we ask them, why should you care about design? And we ask the designers the same question, why should you care about science? Sorry, okay. Okay, getting to second base requires education about each other's discipline. We ask scientists, what would you like to learn about design? And how might other disciplinary approaches impact the way that you solve your own research questions? Getting to third base requires engagement. Now that you've learned about the other discipline, what type of action are you willing to take next? What would you like to do for that? What would you like to do with that knowledge? What kind of outcomes would you like to see changed in your own field of research? And if nothing else, wouldn't it be great to have a useful conversation with someone who doesn't speak the same language as you? And finally, we asked each of our participants, what does a home run look like to you? What would success look like? And for me, being able to approach a complicated problem from multiple points of view and work towards a common goal would definitely be an example of a home run, much like the Foldit example demonstrates. So awareness is the first step. We started off seeing the world from a scientific and design perspective and how those worlds are fairly far apart. And these were some of the remarks from the participants. And I think as a community, we came to the realization that our worlds aren't that far apart, and there's definitely room for collaboration. So I would like to propose a role for design that's early in the scientific research and discovery process. So traditionally, design has been extremely successful in creating new products and services by understanding the deep insights and needs of users. But what role might design play further upstream in the scientific research process, in basic discovery research, as well as in translational research? And I think there's real opportunity for design to play a role in basic discovery research through reframing problems, in creating these conceptual collisions, and in interdisciplinary research teams through having empathy towards each other's disciplines and being able to co-create more successfully. So that just leads me to thank a number of wonderful colleagues, starting with Professor Larry Leifer and others at the Center for Design Research, and really to a whole host of people that I've met in the U.S. and in all over the world who have been instrumental in my thinking about this area and also who have supported me along the way. And I thank you for your attention.